All right, cool.
Let's do this. Let's get wasted.
Hey, everybody.
Questions?
Welcome to Ask GameSpot. It's a show about stuff. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Ask GameSpot, the show where you send us questions and we send you answers on the internet.
Yeah.
Using videos on GameSpot.com. I'm Sean McInnes.
I'm Peter Brown.
Today we're going to talk to you all about Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes. Okay, so our first question comes to us from @Snake8877 on Twitter, who asks, so Metal Gear Solid 5 comes on one disc, or is it the Phantom Pain and both games on the same disc?
Well, I'm glad you asked. At the moment, we actually don't know. Kojima has been sort of, vague about his answer, and from what I understand is that they actually haven't decided yet. What we do know is that Ground Zeroes is the prologue to the Phantom Pain, and the pair makes up the entirety of Metal Gear Solid 5.
Alright, so the next one comes to us from Malachi Jethro Garcia, who asks, so, Ground Zeroes, will it have different gameplay than Metal Gear Solid 5?
The answer to that question is no. From what we understand, Ground Zeroes is a prologue to the story, but it's also meant to introduce players to the changes that have happened to the Metal Gear Solid formula. And therefore, it's kind of a transitionary thing into the Phantom Pain, which is going to be a much larger world, features some open world, mechanics, but they're basically the same thing in terms of gameplay style.
Do you kind of get the sense that Ground Zeroes is going to be a tutorial in some ways?
Yes, it is a tutorial, but I think when you consider the story implications, it's a little bit more important than your average tutorial.
Okay. Alright, so the next one comes to us from Sean Andrew Curry, who asks, so how does equipment work? Since Mother Base is still around, you select items like in Peace Walker and Portable Ops, or are they procured on site like in previous games?
As far as we know, procured on site. During a demo we saw last week in Los Angeles at the new Los Angeles branch of Kojima Productions, there was a scene where he CQC'd an enemy, which is close quarters combat, and he had the option of taking the enemy's weapon and using it against them. From there, you could take it as part of your inventory or leave it. So it seems that anything you're going to acquire will be held or found on site, but there's going to be a lot of opportunity to find different weapons.
So how do you feel about that personally? Because that is the system that I prefer, where you find and scavenge items within the game world and you don't sort of call them to you immediately like in Metal Gear Solid 4. I prefer that style, but I realize that other people kind of prefer the other way. What do you think?
For me, Metal Gear Solid 4 with the whole Drebin system where you could just call upon any weapon you wanted as long as you had the credits to buy it, cheapened the notion of exploring your environment and then having that effort affect the gameplay moving forward. So I'm kind of excited to see the return to that system.
Cool. On the same page then. And the next one comes to us from M. Ahmed P. on Twitter, who asks, is there any online component? Is there anything going to be different about it? I assume he's referring to Metal Gear Solid Online.
Correct.
The online component to Metal Gear Solid 4.
Again, this is kind of one of those things where I don't have a really solid answer on the finer details. What we can say is that Metal Gear Solid Online is being developed at the Los Angeles branch. Now, the big distinction there is the last iterations were developed in Japan. Kojima has gone on the record as saying that, these were more popular in Asia, probably because of that. But, you can't really infer a whole lot of what's going to be different in the new Metal Gear Online, except it'll probably be a slightly different experience, perhaps with more Western ideals of multiplayer gaming taken into account.
So you think leveling up and perks and upgrades and that whole Call of Duty system?
Maybe. It's really hard to say at this point, but the fact that there's a new team doing it, it's mostly Western devs, it's going to have an impact, I think, on the design.
Okay. And finally, @Andy5588 Gaming on Twitter, which somehow is not Naruto fan in disguise, has the following question. Is Metal Gear Solid 5 going to feel like an old school Metal Gear Solid game, or is it going to be more in line of Metal Gear Solid 4?
Well, that's a kind of difficult question to answer. There's a lot of things implied there. One of the biggest things I took away from the show last week when they gave the new demo and had a QA session is that cutscenes are going to be much less prevalent this time around. And building up from Metal Gear Solid 1 to 4, they became increasingly important, especially in 4. Given the open world nature of its design, cutscenes are going to interrupt the gameplay a little bit too much when you're trying to give player freedom. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest changes moving forward, a much more gameplay-focused experience than sort of a cinematic presentation.
Yeah, Metal Gear Solid 4 is still the only game I can recall to date that has mid-cutscene checkpoints.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any other game out there, which kind of speaks to just the prevalence of cutscenes in that game.
Yeah.
But that sounds pretty good to me.
If anything, I would say this game is more like a hybrid between Metal Gear Solid, and Red Dead Redemption, in a way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you're saying that you can ride a horse off a cliff?
Yes.
Sold. And there you have it, folks. That does it for another episode of Ask GameSpot. Make sure to follow GameSpot on Twitter and Facebook if you want to stay up to date on all the future episodes and submit your questions for those installments.
And stay tuned next week for a little bit more coverage of Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes coming straight from TGS, where Kojima Productions is showing off the next-gen version of the game for the first time.
All right, see you guys later.